The Winchester rifle sat heavy in Jack Reed's hands as he peered through his brass spyglass at the distant riders. 6 men, driving 20 head of cattle bearing the Broken Spur brand, his employer's cattle. The morning sun glinted off their silver spurs and gun belts as they pushed the stolen livestock toward the Mexican border. "Bastards are getting bolder," Jack muttered to the 2 cowboys flanking him on the ridge. "Third raid this month." The muscles in Jack's jaw tightened beneath 3 days' worth of stubble. At 42, the former Union Army surgeon carried the hard years in the lines around his eyes and the premature silver streaking his dark hair. His weathered face had seen too much death, first on the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg, then in a Tennessee hospital where diphtheria had claimed his wife and daughter. "Want us to follow him, boss?" asked Hank, a lanky cowhand with a steady hand and a faster draw. Jack was about to answer when something caught his eye, a distant cloud of dust approaching from the east. Not riders, but a single wagon, listing dangerously to one side as it lurched toward the ranch. Through his spyglass, Jack spotted a woman in a faded blue dress clutching something to her chest. "You two keep tracking those rustlers," Jack ordered, lowering the spyglass. "Don't engage unless you have to. Just find out where they're taking our stock." Jack swung on to his bay stallion, a battle-trained mount that had carried him through the war. "I'll handle whatever's coming to the ranch." The urgency in the wagon's approach stirred something in Jack's gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 years of battlefield surgery. Trouble was coming, and it wasn't just the cattle rustlers. "If I'm not back by sundown, ride to Sheriff Taylor in Dry Creek," Jack called over his shoulder as he spurred his horse toward the ranch. "And boys, watch for ambush. These ain't ordinary thieves." Jack covered the 3 miles back to the Broken Spur at a gallop, the Colt 45 slapping against his thigh. As he crested the final ridge overlooking the sprawling ranch, he saw the wagon had already arrived, tilting precariously in front of the cookhouse. The woman was struggling down from the driver's seat, one arm wrapped protectively around a bundle. Even from a distance, Jack could see her exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders and the unsteady way she stood. When she turned toward the cookhouse door, Jack caught a glimpse of her face, young, perhaps 28, with features that might have been beautiful if not drawn tight with fear and desperation. "Help!" Her voice cracked across the yard, thin with panic. "Please, someone help me." Jack dismounted in one fluid motion, looping his reins around the hitching post. His spurs jangled against the hard-packed earth as he strode toward her. The woman's eyes widened at his approach, taking in his imposing frame, the gun at his hip, the intensity of his storm-gray eyes. "Ma'am," Jack nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm Jack Reed, foreman of the Broken Spur." It was then he saw what she was holding, not supplies or belongings, but a child, a baby, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, its face flushed with fever, breath coming in ragged gasps. "My son," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. "He's dying. 3 days with fever. I heard in Dry Creek there was a doctor at this ranch. Please." Jack's mind flashed to another child, his own daughter, burning with fever as he helplessly tried every remedy he knew. The memory stabbed through him like a physical pain. "I'm not the ranch doctor, ma'am," Jack said, already taking the child from her arms. "I am the doctor." The baby was light, too light, and hot to the touch. Jack's trained fingers found the pulse at the tiny neck, rapid, thready. The infant's breath rattled in his chest, a sound Jack had heard too many times on too many deathbeds. "Inside now," Jack ordered, already striding toward the cookhouse. "What's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell," she answered, stumbling to keep up. "The baby is Thomas. My husband was Lieutenant James Mitchell, 7th Cavalry. Apache ambush, 6 months ago." Jack pushed open the cookhouse door with his shoulder. The room was empty. The cook had quit 2 weeks earlier. leaving Jack to manage that crisis along with everything else. He laid the baby on the large wooden table, his mind already cataloging symptoms and possible treatments. How long has he been like this? 3 days, Sarah answered, hovering at his elbow. Started with a cough, then the fever came. I tried willow bark tea, but he couldn't keep it down. Jack nodded, already unbuttoning his shirt sleeves and rolling them up. There's a wooden chest under my bunk in the back room. Bring it here, quickly. While Sarah disappeared into the back room, Jack examined the child. 4 months old, severely dehydrated, pneumonia from the sounds of it. Without treatment, the boy wouldn't last the night. Sarah returned, struggling under the weight of an old Army medical chest. Jack flipped the latches and raised the lid, revealing an organized collection of medicines, instruments, and supplies that would have been the envy of many frontier doctors. You're really a doctor, Sarah whispered. Union Army, 2nd Corps Medical Unit, Jack confirmed, selecting vials and packets with practiced efficiency. 7 years as a field surgeon, 2 years in a Tennessee hospital after the war. His hands moved with practiced precision as he mixed powders and tinctures in a small metal cup. This is Dover's powder with ipecac and willow extract. It'll break the fever and loosen the congestion. We need to get some fluids in him too. Jack worked methodically, his focus absolute. He heated water, added precise amounts of salt and sugar, then filled a small glass dropper. Hold his head, just so, he instructed Sarah, demonstrating the angle. We'll give him the medicine first, then the water, a few drops at a time. Sarah followed his instructions exactly, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. Jack noted her competence with approval. You've done this before. I ran a supply depot with James, she said simply. When you're stationed at the edge of Apache territory, you learn to do everything. Together they worked over the child for nearly an hour, Jack monitoring the baby's breathing and pulse while instructing Sarah on administering the medicine. Gradually, the child's breathing eased, and his skin cooled slightly under Jack's palm. The fever's breaking, Jack announced, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He's not out of danger, but he's fighting. Sarah collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. I thought I'd lose him too. Jack cleaned his instruments methodically, the familiar routine calming his mind. I lost my daughter to diphtheria, he said, the words coming unexpectedly. 3 years ago, my wife followed a week later. Nothing I could do to save either of them. He closed the medical chest with a decisive click. That's when I left medicine. Came west. Figured I'd seen enough death to last a lifetime. Yet you just saved my son's life, Sarah said quietly. Jack's reply was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. He moved to the window, his hand automatically dropping to his Colt. 3 riders approached. Victor Blake, the ranch owner's son, and 2 men Jack didn't recognize. Even from a distance, Jack could see the trouble in Victor's swagger and the hard look of the men with him. We've got company, Jack said grimly, and not the welcome kind. Victor Blake was 30, handsome in a soft way that suggested too much whiskey and too little honest work. As the only son of Robert Blake, he expected to inherit the Broken Spur someday. The problem was, he wanted to run it now, not when his father finally relinquished control. Stay inside, Jack told Sarah. Keep Thomas quiet if you can. Jack stepped onto the porch as Victor and his companions reined in. Victor's eyes were bloodshot, his expensive shirt rumpled from a night of drinking in town. What's this I hear about you taking in strays, Reed? Victor called, not bothering to dismount. Hank says you've got a woman and a brat in my cookhouse. Jack stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, one hand casually near his sidearm. Mrs. Mitchell needed medical assistance for her child. I provided it. Victor's companion, a lean, hard-faced man with a vicious scar running from his right eye to his jawline, studied Jack with cold calculation. Jack had seen that look before. in the eyes of men who killed for pleasure rather than necessity. "This is my friend, Major Silas Dixon," Victor said with a smirk. "Former Confederate officer. He's helping me with some ranch security issues." Jack nodded curtly, recognizing the name. Silas Dixon had been court-martialed for executing prisoners, but escaped punishment when the war ended. Since then, his name had been connected to hired gun work across 3 territories. "We're not a charity house, Reed," Victor continued. "Get them out of here by morning." Jack held his ground. "The child is too sick to travel, and in case you've forgotten, your father put me in charge while he's recovering. The woman stays until I say otherwise." Victor's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, the cookhouse door opened behind Jack. Sarah stepped out, her spine straight despite her exhaustion. "I don't require charity, Mr. Blake," she said, her voice steadier than Jack would have expected. "I'm an experienced cook. Your ranch hands need feeding, and I need work. It seems we could help each other." Victor opened his mouth to object, but Silas Dixon laid a restraining hand on his arm. "The boys have been complaining about the food since Charlie left," he said smoothly. "Might not be a bad arrangement. Temporarily." Jack caught the calculating look in Dixon's eyes and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The man was too interested in Sarah, too quick to accommodate her presence. "Fine," Victor spat. "She can cook, but she's your responsibility, Reed." His gaze shifted to Sarah with undisguised contempt. "And you'd better be worth the trouble." As they rode away, Jack turned to Sarah with a frown. "You shouldn't have done that." "I won't be a burden," she replied firmly. "I've fed 50 soldiers with nothing but salt pork and flour. I can handle your cowboys." Jack studied her face, the determination in her blue eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. Despite her exhaustion and fear, there was steel in Sarah Mitchell. "It's not your cooking I'm worried about," Jack said quietly. "There's trouble brewing on this ranch. Cattle rustling, missing supplies, men hired without my approval. Something's not right, and I don't want you and your boy caught in the middle of it." Sarah glanced back at the cookhouse where Thomas slept. "We've nowhere else to go, Mr. Reed, and I've survived worse than a ranch with problems." Jack sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. "Call me Jack, and your first meal is for the morning crew. 20 men, hungry enough to eat the hide off a steer?" Sarah nodded, already turning toward the cookhouse with renewed purpose. "I'll be ready." Jack watched her go, wondering if he'd just offered sanctuary or drawn an innocent woman and her child into a storm that was gathering over the broken spur. Either way, it was too late to turn back now. By the end of her first week, Sarah had transformed the Broken Spur's cookhouse. The cowboys, suspicious at first, had been won over by fresh biscuits and gravy that didn't taste like saddle leather. Even Jack, who'd resigned himself to bad food as a fact of ranch life, found himself lingering over meals. Thomas improved steadily under Jack's care. The pneumonia retreated, leaving the boy thin but alert, his eyes tracking movement with growing interest. Jack checked on him daily, monitoring his breathing and weight with meticulous attention. "He's getting stronger," Jack announced one evening, listening to the boy's chest with his stethoscope. "Another week, and you wouldn't know he'd been sick." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing a beauty that hardship had temporarily obscured. "Thanks to you." Jack packed away his medical tools, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I just did what needed doing." "Is that why you left medicine?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because you couldn't save your family despite doing everything that needed doing?" Jack's hands stilled. No one at the Broken Spur asked about his past. Not after the first cowhand who tried ended up with a broken nose. "Some things can't be fixed," he said finally. "Not with medicine, not with anything. I learned that the hard way." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open. Hank stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Raiders hit the north pasture," he gasped. "Took 30 head and shot Sam when he tried to stop him." Jack was on his feet instantly. "How bad?" "Gut shot," Hank replied grimly. "We got him to the bunkhouse, but it's bad, boss." Jack grabbed his medical chest. "Get my horse ready and find Victor. Tell him what happened." Sarah caught his arm. "What can I do?" "Boil water, tear clean sheets for bandages," Jack instructed, "and keep your rifle close. If trouble comes, take Thomas and hide in the root cellar behind the smokehouse. There's a false wall at the back that leads to a tunnel. Robert Blake built it during the Apache raids 10 years ago." Jack followed Hank to the bunkhouse, where Sam Harper lay on a narrow cot, his face gray with shock and pain. The other cowboys stood awkwardly around him, hats in hand, already mourning. "Give me space," Jack ordered, shrugging off his coat. "Hank, I need light. Plenty of it." Jack cut away Sam's blood-soaked shirt, exposing the wound in his abdomen. One look told him the damage was catastrophic. The bullet had torn through the liver and likely the intestines. "Sam," Jack said, meeting the dying man's eyes, "this is beyond patching up. I can give you morphine for the pain, but that's all I can do. I'm sorry." Sam nodded weakly. "Knew it when they shot me. Just wanted to get home first." He gripped Jack's wrist with surprising strength. "It was Dixon, Doc. Him and those new boys of his. They weren't even hiding it." Jack felt cold rage settle in his chest. "You're sure?" "Saw his face clear as day," Sam whispered. "Called me by name before he pulled the trigger." Jack administered morphine, easing Sam's final moments while the other men watched in grim silence. When Sam finally stopped breathing, Jack closed his eyes and stood. "Get your weapons," he told the assembled cowboys. "We're riding to the north pasture." "What about the boss?" someone asked. "Robert Blake is still laid up with his back," Jack replied, "and I'm not waiting for Victor to give permission to chase the men who murdered Sam." Jack led 12 armed cowboys to the north pasture, following tracks that made no attempt at concealment. The brazenness of it fueled Jack's suspicion that this was more than ordinary rustling. They found the stolen cattle 5 miles north, near the boundary with the neighboring Bartee Ranch. The cattle were unguarded, left in a box canyon as if waiting to be collected later. "It's a trap," Jack realized, scanning the ridgelines around them. "Pull back." Gunfire erupted from the rocks above them. 2 cowboys fell immediately, one dead before he hit the ground, the other clutching a shattered shoulder. Jack fired his Winchester at the muzzle flashes, dropping one shooter with a clean shot through the chest. "Scatter and return fire," Jack shouted, taking cover behind a boulder. "Hank, get the wounded out of the killing zone." For 10 minutes, the canyon echoed with gunfire. Jack's military training took over as he directed his men, turning what should have been a massacre into a fighting retreat. When the shooting finally stopped, Jack's side had lost 3 men, with 2 more wounded, but they'd killed at least 4 of the ambushers. "They're pulling back," Hank reported, crawling to Jack's position. "Looks like we hurt them worse than they expected." Jack nodded grimly. This wasn't about cattle. It was about reducing our numbers. Someone wants the broken spur badly enough to murder for it. They returned to the ranch at dusk, carrying their dead across their saddles. Sarah was waiting on the porch, rifle in hand, Thomas secured in a sling across her chest. "Victor came looking for you," she said as Jack dismounted. "He was furious that you took men without his permission. When I wouldn't tell him where you'd gone, he said I'd regret crossing him." Jack's expression darkened. "Where is he now?" "Rode into town with Dixon and those other men. But before they left, I overheard them talking about a shipment coming tomorrow night. Something about meeting Mexican buyers at Devil's Crossing." Jack exchanged glances with Hank. "Devil's Crossing is where the old smuggling trails meet the river," he said. "If they're selling our cattle to Mexican buyers, They'd need someone with authority to approve moving that many head across the border, Hank finished. Someone in the territorial government. Jack made his decision. Get some rest, all of you. Tomorrow night we're going to Devil's Crossing. It's time to end this. After the men dispersed, Jack checked Sarah's rifle. You handled yourself well, he said, noting the weapon was clean and properly loaded. Military wife? Sarah nodded. James made sure I could protect myself. Said a woman alone in the territories needed more than just luck. Smart man, Jack said. He hesitated, then added, if this goes badly tomorrow, there's money in my quarters. Enough to get you and Thomas to San Francisco. The keys hidden under the floorboard beneath my bed. Sarah studied his face in the fading light. You're expecting trouble. I'm expecting war, Jack corrected. Victor isn't just rustling cattle. He's making a play for the entire ranch. And I think his father is the next target. Robert Blake was 65 with a soldier's bearing despite the back injury that had confined him to his bed for the past month. As Jack entered the ranch house, Blake set aside the ledger he'd been reviewing. You've had a busy day, Reed, the old man said. 3 men dead, and my son tells me you're defying his orders. Your son is working with rustlers, Jack replied bluntly. And I think he's planning to sell a large portion of your herd to Mexican buyers. Blake's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. What proof do you have? Jack laid out everything. The pattern of rustling, Sam's dying testimony, the ambush, and the conversation Sarah had overheard. When he finished, Blake was silent for a long moment. I always knew Victor lacked spine, he finally said, but I never thought he'd betray his own blood. There's more, Jack continued. I believe Dixon isn't just helping with the rustling. I think Victor hired him to eliminate anyone who stands in his way, including you. Blake nodded slowly. The accident that injured my back wasn't entirely accidental. Saddle girth was cut halfway through. I suspected, but couldn't prove it. He fixed Jack with a piercing stare. What do you intend to do about it? Stop the sale at Devil's Crossing, Jack said. Capture Dixon if possible. Bring him back to stand trial for Sam's murder. And my son? Jack met the old man's gaze. That's for you to decide. Blake reached for his cane. Help me up, Reed. If there's to be a reckoning, I want to be part of it. The plan was simple but dangerous. Jack, Blake, and 8 trusted cowboys would intercept the cattle drive at Devil's Crossing before the Mexican buyers arrived. Sarah insisted on joining them, pointing out that with so many men gone, someone needed to protect Thomas at the ranch. I'm not staying behind while you face Dixon, she said firmly. Not after what he did to Sam. Jack recognized the same determination he'd seen in her when she first arrived. You'll follow orders, he said. No heroics. They rode out at sunset, taking a hidden trail that would bring them to Devil's Crossing ahead of Victor's men. As darkness fell, they positioned themselves among the rocks overlooking the meeting point. Riders coming, Hank whispered. About 15 men, driving 60 head. Through his spyglass, Jack spotted Victor at the head of the procession, with Dixon riding beside him. Behind them came the cattle and a mix of unfamiliar men. Hired guns by the look of them. No sign of the Mexican buyers yet, Jack murmured. We wait. Robert Blake shifted uncomfortably beside him. I want to hear it from Victor's own mouth. I need to know how far he's fallen. They didn't have to wait long. As the cattle were corralled in the natural pen formed by the river bend, a new group of riders appeared from the south, 5 men in Mexican military uniforms, led by a corpulent officer with elaborate silver decorations on his uniform. Captain Ortega, Blake identified the leader, corrupt to the bone, supplies Mexican ranches with stolen American cattle, then sells beef to both sides during border conflicts. Victor greeted Ortega with the familiarity of an established business relationship. Their voices carried clearly in the night air. 60 prime broken spur cattle, Victor announced proudly. And next month, I can deliver 200 more. Ambitious, Ortega replied. But what of your father? My contacts say he still lives. Victor's laugh was cold. Not for much longer. Once I'm confirmed as owner, we can expand operations across the whole territory. Blake's hand tightened on his rifle. I've heard enough. Jack raised his arm, signaling the men spread through the rocks. Take them. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions, catching Victor's men by surprise. 3 fell immediately, while others dove for cover. The Mexican buyers turned to flee, but Jack had positioned men to cut off their escape. In the chaos, Jack spotted Dixon drawing a bead on Blake. Without hesitation, Jack fired, the bullet striking Dixon's shoulder and spinning him around. Dixon recovered quickly, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Get down, Jack shouted, pushing Blake behind a boulder as bullets chipped stone around them. From her position 30 yards away, Sarah fired at a gunman advancing on Jack's position, dropping the man with a clean shot to the chest. The move drew Dixon's attention, and he turned his weapon toward her. Jack broke cover, firing rapidly as he charged Dixon's position. A bullet grazed his ribs, but he didn't slow. Dixon's gun clicked empty as Jack reached him. The former Confederate officer drew a knife, slashing at Jack's face. They grappled in the dirt, Dixon's military training making him a formidable opponent despite his wounded shoulder. The knife sliced into Jack's arm as they rolled, but Jack managed to pin Dixon's knife hand with his knee. With his free hand, Jack delivered a crushing blow to Dixon's throat. Dixon gasped, eyes bulging as his windpipe collapsed. Jack could have finished him then. A twist of the knife would have ended it, but he stayed his hand. That's for Sam, Jack growled. You'll hang properly for it. The firefight was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Victor and 3 of his men were captured, along with Captain Ortega. 7 others lay dead among the rocks. On Jack's side, 2 cowboys were wounded, but none killed. Victor knelt before his father, defiance mixing with fear on his face. You don't understand, he spat. The ranch is dying. Cattle prices are falling. I found a way to save it. Blake regarded his son with cold disappointment. By becoming a thief and a murderer? By betraying everything I built? The old man turned to Jack. Take him to Sheriff Taylor in Dry Creek. I'll follow when I've settled matters here. As they secured the prisoners, Sarah approached Jack, her rifle still at the ready. You're wounded, she said, gesturing to the blood staining his shirt. Just a cut, Jack replied. I've had worse shaving. Sarah's expression remained serious. When I saw Dixon aiming at you, she paused, struggling with words. I realized I couldn't lose you too. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw more than a widow with a sick child. He saw a woman who had faced death and hardship without breaking, who had rebuilt her life from ashes, just as he was trying to do. We've both lost enough, he said quietly. The moment was interrupted as Hank approached. Boss, you'd better come quick. It's Blake. Something's wrong. They found Robert Blake sitting against a boulder, his face ashen, one hand pressed to his chest. Damn, Hart, he gasped. Always knew it would get me in the end. Jack knelt beside him, medical instincts taking over. But one look at Blake told him this was beyond his skills to fix. The old rancher was dying. Victor, Blake asked. Secured, Jack confirmed. He'll face justice. Blake nodded, then winced with pain. The ranch, he wheezed. Papers in my desk. Made you partner last month. Figured I'd tell you when the time was right. His hand clutched Jack's sleeve. Take care of my legacy, Doc. Make it something worth leaving behind. With those words, Robert Blake, founder of the Broken Spur, closed his eyes for the final time. 6 months later, Jack stood on the porch of the main house, watching a new herd of cattle graze in the south pasture. The Broken Spur was recovering. Victor Blake had been sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, while Silas Dixon had cheated the hangman, by dying of his wounds en route to trial. Thinking deep thoughts, Dr. Reed? Sarah asked, joining him on the porch. Thomas, now a healthy, robust 10-month-old, balanced on her hip, reaching for Jack with pudgy hands. Jack took the boy, settling him comfortably in the crook of his arm. Just appreciating the view, he replied. The new breeding stock looks promising. Sarah smiled, knowing he wasn't just talking about cattle. The men are asking if you're joining them for the spring roundup. Wouldn't miss it, Jack said, but I need to finish setting up the infirmary first. 3 families are moving on to Broken Spur land next week. That's a dozen more children who'll need care. After Blake's death, Jack had implemented changes that transformed the Broken Spur from just a cattle operation to a true community. The new medical clinic served not only the ranch but the surrounding homesteads. It was, he felt, a proper use of the skills he'd once abandoned. You're not just a ranch doctor anymore, Sarah observed. You're building something bigger here. Jack looked at Thomas, then at Sarah. The past 6 months had seen their relationship evolve from mutual respect to something deeper. They had both known loss too intimately to rush into declarations of love, but what was growing between them was stronger for its careful cultivation. We're building it together, Jack corrected her. All 3 of us. Thomas babbled happily, pointing at a hawk circling overhead. Jack felt something settle in his chest, not the absence of old grief, but the presence of new purpose. He had come west to escape his past and found instead a future worth fighting for. I was thinking, Jack said casually, that boy needs a proper father, someone to teach him to ride and shoot when the time comes. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you volunteering, Dr. Reed? Jack shifted Thomas to his other arm and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band. I believe I am, Mrs. Mitchell, if you'll have me. Sarah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she took the ring. We've both known what it means to lose everything, she said softly. Are you sure you're ready to risk that again? Jack looked out over the Broken Spur, at the land that had given him a second chance, at the woman who had shown him that courage wasn't just about facing death, but about embracing life despite its risks. Some things are worth the risk, he said simply. Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, then reached up to touch Jack's face. Then yes, Dr. Reed, I believe we have an agreement. As the sun set over the Broken Spur, Jack Reed held his future in his arms, a woman who matched his strength, a child who had survived against the odds, and a promise of days to come that would be hard but worthy. For a man who had once abandoned healing to escape his pain, he had found that the greatest healing came not from running away, but from building something new from the broken pieces of the past. Some wounds never fully healed, Jack knew, but life continued regardless, and sometimes, if you were fortunate, it offered not just survival, but redemption. Thomas reached up to touch Jack's face, his tiny fingers tracing the lines etched by years of hardship and grief. And Jack Reed, once a battlefield surgeon who had lost faith in his ability to save lives, smiled at the child he had saved and the woman who had, in her own way, saved him. The Broken Spur had found its healer, and the healer had found his home.